Good afternoon to my East Coast and good morning to everyone on the West Coast and in between. We are pleased to have you join us for this pertinent discussion about asynchronous and synchronous learning hosted by Digital Promises League of Innovative Schools. Over the past year, technology has played an increasing role in how we engage and teach our learners. How we interact both synchronously and asynchronously has evolved and shown incredible academic and relationship results. In this panel today, we will explore how teachers have tangibly balanced synchronous and asynchronous learning in their instructional practices over the past year. In partnership with Smart Technologies today, we are having a timely discussion on building the connections with asynchronous and synchronous learning. I am Dwayne McClary, the director of the League of Innovative Schools at Digital Promise. The League of Innovative Schools is Digital Promise's flagship initiative, and over the past 10 years have grown into a robust network of 114 public school districts in 21 states, representing over 3.4 million students. League members are committed to working together to improve student outcomes and solve the challenges facing K-12 through innovative strategies, learning technologies, and research. The League of Innovative Schools works to validate, champion, and scale innovative learning practices to advance equity and excellence in all learners and for all learners. I am once again Dwayne McClary, director of the League, and I would like to introduce my co-host, Ms. Katie Novak, who is the Global Brand Ambassador at Smart Technologies. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, Dwayne. Great to be here. Always an honor to share time and space with you. So thank you so much.
Great.
Awesome. So really excited to be welcoming everyone here today to this important conversation about synchronous and asynchronous learning and strategies that have worked or not over the last year. So a quick overview of a few of the learnings that we're all going to take away with us today. First, really an overview, as I mentioned, of those synchronous and asynchronous strategies that teachers have been deploying in their classrooms and outside of their classrooms. What outcomes our educators have seen from various types of both synchronous and asynchronous strategies, and some ideas and insight about what tools can be brought forward into the coming school years. What have we learned this year? What are we using this year that we're going to be able to bring forward into the school years to come? Before we get into that, a very quick hello and overview of Smart Technologies for those of you who are not familiar with us or who might be familiar with who we used to be many years ago. You might know us as the inventors of the Smartboard, of interactive whiteboards. Many of you might still have them hanging at the front of your classrooms with big projectors, or you might be familiar with the newer iterations of smart interactive panels like the ones you see in the image here. But a quick, shout out for those who might not be familiar with our software that stands alone from Smartboards. It's accessible to teachers and students, and as well of our research. So I wanted to take a few minutes as we lay the groundwork for talking about synchronous and asynchronous learning to talk a little bit about some of the research that we at Smart have done in the last year. So one of these pieces was really around what did it look like to be ready for emergency remote teaching, as we'll all remember was the case about a year ago. And over the course of sort of last spring and summer, Smart reached out to educators across the globe and really aimed to understand what did readiness look like, what was leading to outcomes for schools with emergency remote teaching, and what sort of tools and practices helped them with this transition period. So in part of that research, we understood that, a lot of people had to get ready really quickly. We also were able to understand some of the key pieces that schools, districts, organizations needed to have in place for effectiveness. So some of that was related, of course, to content. Some of that was related to already having technology available in their schools that allowed them to pivot quickly. And really a variety of pieces that helped to showcase success. And we're able to showcase that research and continue that research as well over the course of the last year. And we've come away with three key findings. I'll start in the middle with number two. The idea, as I mentioned, schools and districts that had technology available to them at the outset of the pandemic, including learning management systems, were able to pivot a lot more quickly and were able to have better success with both their teaching and with their students' learning over the course of the last year. Our third key finding there is that really that idea of continuous, purposeful, and really relevant professional development can make a significant difference to outcomes for teachers and can definitely make a difference, I think many of us would agree, for the mental health of teachers as well. And then the first key finding, which really brings us to the conversation that I'm excited for us to have today, is around the idea that successful remote instruction must involve both synchronous and asynchronous instructions and lessons, as well as that layer of a focus on well-being for both our students and for our teachers. So that brings us to today's conversation, and I'm very excited to be joined here today by two educators from Lake Washington School District. Lake Washington is a LEAD district. They have over 30,000 students across 56 schools. About 10% of their students in this school year are English language learners, and about 11% of their students in this school year are utilizing the free and reduced lunch program. Some of the data from Lake Washington in terms of how they've responded to and invested in response to the pandemic included 5,300 gallons of hand sanitizer, as well as a significant investment in laptops for both students and for teachers, as well as hotspots to help ensure that students and teachers had the access that they needed to ensure that learning could continue. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our panel today, starting with my colleague from Smart Technologies, Chris Astle. Chris is an education strategist with us at Smart and gets to do incredible work around the world with schools and districts. Chris has a background in education herself and was an inner city teacher for many years, and certainly has a passion for equity, for social justice, and for culturally responsive teaching. And Chris brings a lot to the table, both with her own heart, her own experience, and the experience that she's had connecting with classrooms around the world as well. Also really pleased to be joined by Erin Glover and Brenna McFerrin. Both Erin and Brenna are elementary grades 2 and 3 teachers at Lake Washington School District, and they're also both tech facilitators within the district. So they have a lot of great background in their classrooms and supporting and facilitating technology implementation for the district. And they both happen to be Smart ambassadors, part of our global ambassador community as well. And we're so proud to have incredible educators like Erin and Brenna from all corners of the world. And I've seen a couple of familiar names on the attendee list here for the webinar as well. So a big hello to all of our amazing Smart ambassadors out there. So let's get the conversation started. I know that Lake Washington has had pretty much everything when it comes to how teaching has needed to happen and learning has needed to happen over this last year. I think you've had some combination of remote, online, blended at various points in the year. So Erin, can you tell us a little bit more about what that has looked like and what kind of challenges you've seen over the last year?
Well, we definitely have tried it all this last year and a half. When we first went into lockdown, we only had an LMS. We didn't have any way to connect with students at all. And so that was the biggest hurdle, I think, for our district. And then we moved in using a remote model, using Teams and being able to connect with our students, having class meetings. And then we went to this hybrid model where we were doing 2 days with half of our class every other day. And now we're in a modified in-person where we are still using Teams and asynchronous activities, but we are also in person with our kids on kind of like a modified schedule. So it's been a lot, like you said, pivoting and a lot of learning. I think our biggest challenges were just seeing how things were going on their end, especially when we were remote only, we couldn't see the problems that they were having with their technology, or we couldn't really help them, and they weren't really savvy yet at knowing how to navigate around their computers and their technology, and we couldn't see like physically what they were doing, like their work. And so that's when the online tools and resources really came into play for us, because then we could start to see their their output of their work, and then we could really start having conversations about that. But the great benefits to it is really how savvy kids are becoming on technology and really navigating these resources and these tools, and developing those soft skills like time management and advocating for themselves, and just all those things that, you know, we do as adults, but we don't think about for our kids. So there's been a lot of good things that have come from this as well.
That's great. Yeah, I loved how you used that word. They weren't savvy yet with navigating. We know that students and families, whole communities have learned. We've all learned a lot in this last year and a bit.
For sure.
So with all of that kind of background and context in mind, I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of how you balanced both synchronous and asynchronous strategies throughout all of that over this last year. And Brenna, I'll let you start a response there.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I think the biggest takeaway for me in finding balance between synchronous and asynchronous strategies was really deciding when to use which, and deciding when is it best to be using synchronous, and when is it best to use asynchronous and digital tools. And I think the main thing is that we only had so much connection time with our kids. So when you're face to face with those kids, whether it be a live meeting or, during hybrid time, the time was very limited. And so it was so important to really focus on things like social emotional connections. Anytime we can do collaboration, things that are interactive and engaging, try to save those for the synchronous activities, and the things that can be done asynchronously, use all the amazing digital tools that we have, and things that can be done like handouts or worksheets or practice, things that kids can do independently at their own pace. Those were great things to do asynchronously. So I think finding that balance and using our time really well during the time we had with our kids was the most important thing.
Yeah, that's huge. What kind of benefits did you see with your students when, Erin, you spoke a little bit about some of the skill development, but what kind of benefits came from finding that balance between synchronous and asynchronous strategies?
I think that the online resources really helped with kids being able to find their choice and their voice. And so they were able to choose how they were going to share. And I know I run across this quote a lot when it says, to teach is to learn twice. And so I thought that was really valuable for kids that are able to share out how do they solve a math problem, or how do they create a craft project. And so it really gave them that ability to choose how they wanted to share, and finding their voice and engaging in their learning, and also being able to plan things out without the stress of like being in a classroom in front of everybody and everyone's watching them and getting nervous about it.
Yeah, love that. Chris, I'd like to toss it over to you for, a little bit of background of some of the balance that you've seen. What different synchronous and asynchronous strategies have you seen different schools deploying over this last year and a half?
Well, I think the thing that's been, most interesting to me is prior to the pandemic, when we thought about asynchronous learning, we kind of thought about, homework activities or, student-led projects that students did on their own. And we didn't necessarily think about the collaborative aspects of asynchronous work. And so as we moved into this, this time of emergency remote learning, like Brenna mentioned, we really needed to build connection. We needed to support our students socially as well as academically. And so starting to think about the ways that asynchronous learning benefits our students and the ways they can do that collaboratively. And so when we think a little bit about the equity component, not all of our students are super fast processors. And when we start to pivot to asynchronous learning, then we're starting to give students the opportunity to explore the content at their own pace. And to dive into things that are interesting to them so they can connect to the learning. They have the opportunity to be creative. They have the opportunity also to come back better prepared for the synchronous moments because they've reflected on those things. And so then we start to put them into groups. So we could do a team jigsaw, but we don't have to be synchronously together. I can use the technology to put you in a virtual digital group, and you can be contributing and teaching your peers and getting feedback. And as a teacher, I can get in and there can be a feedback loop that happens asynchronously. But now we're all processing at the speed that's appropriate for us. We're picking that, the pace, the place, and the path we're going on the learning, and we're teaching that back. And there's so many ways to do it. Even doing new think, pair, shares asynchronously, like taking a lot of those activities that are collaborative in the classroom and allowing students to do them together in an asynchronous manner really helps them feel connected and empowered. And then also builds those soft skills. Because if you think about adults, how much of our collaboration is done asynchronously through email or through other, different mediums, and letting students practice that, I think was really key and a really strong piece that came out of this experience.
I was just going to add something to what Chris was saying. I had a parent mention to me that after a few months of doing a remote learning during a conference, say that they were very impressed with the skills that their child was learning that otherwise never would have happened. And things like, he said he was very pleased with her academics and he wasn't really concerned with whether or not she learned everything she needed to learn in second grade. He knew eventually she would catch up and be okay and it would all be fine. But he was really most impressed with all of the skills she was learning, like being able to manage her time and being able to navigate and being able to ask a question and speak up for herself when she needed to. And he said, I go in her room and it's really important to me that she's on task and doing what she's supposed to be doing when no one's watching. And he's like, that's a skill she would have never had the chance to build until she was much older. So I think there's a lot of silver linings and things. I know that this has been a struggle for many people and many families across the globe, but I think there's also a lot of great things that kids have learned and that will come from this.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Yeah, really, Chris, the moment you said of like, before the pandemic, asynchronous is homework. And we've really been forced for better in a lot of ways to think about things differently. So with that in mind, what sort of those practices that evolved during, emergency remote teaching or since, are you going to be carrying forward into, face-to-face learning? Whether that's in the next few weeks for some people, whether that's in a few months, how has that shaped your teaching practice? And what kind of tools and strategies are you going to be bringing forward? Erin, I'll let you start with that question.
Well, definitely, like everyone said, a lot of positives have come from this. And, we were just chatting the other day about how any kind of collaborative work inside the classroom was kids being put into groups, and usually one kid doing all the talking and then several of the other students that were a little shy or didn't really know the content well would not participate. And so it was always kind of a struggle to encourage all the students in the group to really participate and take a piece from it. But now with the tools, we are able to use different strategies, and like Chris said, at their own pace, and absorb the information a little differently and take a piece of things and learn it and then come together and collaborate. Anything like whiteboards where we can just do on the fly collaboration, or things like Flipgrid where they can share out and create things, and any kind of tool like that just benefits all the students and provides that ownership and the voice and the time management, and also it encourages that pride. And anytime they feel good about things, they obviously are, they want to produce more. And so I think it just provides that equity piece, like it's been mentioned, that it really provides everyone a little piece of something that helps them empower themselves.
Chris, what would you add from more of an older student or high school perspective, both Bren and Aaron, are the younger students, and in some ways we're kind of treating some of the younger students as if, they're older students, how we would traditionally think about that. Brenna, to your point around, the father's input around his daughter developing skills that she might not have gotten until she was much older. Chris, what have you seen this look like in older and high school classrooms?
Right. So, I mean, I think it's amazing as the mother of a middle schooler, the things that she can do now that I wasn't expecting, I love. But when we think about our older students, right, like they've started to form their personalities, they've started to form their passions, like they are identifying where some of their bands of greatness are. And so when we take these opportunities to give them the time and space, like for me, asynchronous learning is such a powerful tool. And if there's one thing that I really hope stays and persists after the pandemic, it's creating these asynchronous opportunities, even when our students are face to face, because now my older students, again, giving the voice and choice and, referencing some of the same tools that Aaron mentioned, like making a Flipgrid video, creating a podcast, maybe doing, a documentary, or creating a playlist of songs to go with the theme, like letting them start to take the time to explore the content, to do some self-assessment. We've got the technology tools. They can go in and they can understand where they are. They can start to identify their own gaps in their learning. They can start to identify the resources they need. So they're developing this time and resource management, but then they're pulling in their own passions. They're making connections, which is going to deepen that knowledge. It's going to stay with them. They're going to be able to apply it in different places, but then how they showcase it and the pride that they bring back to the classroom, that also builds up their efficacy belief in that subject area. So the more we can do that, connect them to the content, build up their efficacy beliefs, we're starting to make them lifelong learners. And it's just about, taking that risk and letting the students say, hey, I like to make videos, or I can illustrate this, or I can, create a podcast interview where I talk about it. Or they may pick a more traditional, they may want to write something, but giving them that flexibility to pick the tool at their disposal that they already have the skills in and showcase you those unique skills connected to the content. Like that's so powerful. And that's how we take the kids who maybe were disengaged and get them connected to the experience and start to give them a voice that's going to carry with them when they leave school and they go on to the next thing that life has in store for them.
I think it's so great that they have all these tools, and now that they're so confident in using them. And so looking ahead, we're in a modified face-to-face situation right now. So our kids have Wednesdays that is still asynchronous. And I really hope to see it continue, because I'm able to have that time for kids to be able to choose how they're going to share their learning. And now they are really, confident in all these tools that they have access to. So take a child who maybe would be afraid to share their writing in front of the whole class can now share their writing on Flipgrid or a variety of other ways that we have to share, and they're able to do it. And if they don't like the first try, they can try it again and really get it just how they want it. They can add, all of the interesting features that they have in it, like pictures. They can, in fact, if they don't want to be on the video, they can also use the picture of their story and just have their voice read it. So there's just so many choices for them now. And I think it's just really powerful. You're having kids have access to their voice that were afraid to use it before.
And Brenna, one of the things you just said too, like with the asynchronous Wednesday and having the students, get the support they need, we're also creating students who learn to advocate for themselves. And maybe where the classroom, the speed, the pace prevented them from reaching out and asking questions, now they've got that place to do it. And then as they practice that skill, it only becomes stronger. And I think that's such an amazing gift to give them.
And I think for teachers too, I find that I have time now to really dive deeper into my planning and instruction. Mm-hmm. Just having that little bit of space during the week to really create more interesting and engaging lessons and have time to use all the different tools that I have access to. Mm-hmm. Or before, there's so much curriculum we have to cover. It just feels like teachers and students now have time to really dive deeper.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Interesting, that idea. Brendan, you mentioned like, oh, if they, don't like it the first time, they can redo something. That idea that the stakes when it comes to asynchronous in terms of failure are a bit
Mhm.
different,
Yes.
and perhaps more realistic to the real world. It's very rare, of course, in our adult lives that we have one chance to pass a test or one chance to do something properly. We're continually changing and shifting and understanding things a little bit differently. Would you agree that kind of the more of an asynchronous role kind of allows students for that adaptation and failure?
For sure.
For sure, definitely. And to look at it not as, I don't know, I mean, I know that I'm not utilizing homework anymore at all with my students. And I know that kids in upper grades, that changes as they get a bit older, but I just giving them time to actually do learning that's part of the classroom and not just consider something asynchronous to be extra practice, but an important part of what we're doing.
Mhm.
And I think if you look at the asynchronous too, right? Like when we think about asynchronous before, like you did the homework, you came back, you gave the homework to the teacher. And now that we've got these digital tools to support asynchronous, it's making the students' thinking and learning visible as it evolves. And then your feedback can jump into the process. So again, much to the point of like doing it again if they don't like it, you can give them that support as they're working through it. They can evolve during the learning. The feedback is immediate, and we know that that's what it takes to really develop the strengths and skills in our students, and that the technology and the asynchronous opportunity has really empowered that.
I love using voice feedback with kids,
Yeah.
like especially in OneNote, or I can give directions in Smart Learning Suite online. I can use my voice to either give directions or give feedback to kids, and that's been really powerful. As they start to turn in their work, I can then just pop in and leave a little note
Mhm.
to them with my voice, and then they can leave me voice feedback also. I mean, just the access to the tools we have is amazing.
Yeah.
The accessibility features.
Mhm. It really opens up the conversation between, because when our classrooms are getting larger in size, and that ability to really have some sort of interaction with every student is sometimes really challenging, even though you're in a classroom with them. But this way, even just annotating a note or leaving a little praise, or, hey, I really like how you did that. Why don't you talk about also this part and add this detail? And so it really does. I feel like I have more interaction with all my students more times than I have ever before.
That's remarkable. I don't think, 14 months ago, any of us would have guessed, that you would be sitting here today saying that you've actually had more interaction with your students.
Right, right.
What has that done for your relationships with your students? We're talking a lot about the academics, but we know how important the relationships are, with our students. How has that evolved for you in the last year? And what has the idea of bringing these different synchronous and asynchronous strategies in done for your relationships?
Mhm.
I think that kids have more access to me, more authentic access to communicate with me. Before, if they had a question, especially younger grades, I know older grades, like we've always had access to email for the kids,
Mhm.
but with things like Microsoft Teams, they can just pop a little question in any time of day and get help or feedback. They also feel like there's other ways to talk to me. They can come to me face to face now, or they can send me a little message, or just even giving each other feedback, or having me give them feedback on their work in different ways. I just feel like it's created a safer space for kids to be able to communicate, and for it to be more of an open, authentic dialogue between the teacher and the students. Sometimes some kids feel that that's a lot of pressure to go talk to your teacher if you have something that you need to talk about, or something that's hard to talk about. And so there's a lot of different avenues now.
Mhm. Definitely. And when, students are a little more on the quiet or shy side, being able to connect with a different part of them that you wouldn't necessarily see is been really wonderful. I mean, I have a student who makes little crafts and creates little videos and shares them out with her class just through Flipgrid. We just have a Flipgrid every month that's called Random Things, and she just creates things and shares them out, and the kids love them. And I don't think that any of us would be able to connect with her in that way without these online resources. And so it's been really wonderful.
Yeah, that's huge. And that role that technology has been able to play with that. Chris, any really amazing, relationship stories or pieces that you've seen from some of our older students?
Well, what I think from our older students too is, they have more ways to communicate, but they're also learning this really important life skill, which is identifying the most appropriate mechanism for communication. So if I think about like back when I graduated from school, like I didn't head out into college necessarily knowing like, when do you write an email? When do you put it in the chat? When do you need to have a face-to-face conversation? And students are getting this practice in that. And for our older students who, are headed out into the workforce, that's so key. But even the things like, the random things like doing that, I've seen so many instances of that with, older students where we maybe, hadn't connected as deeply with them before, but now we're really taking the time to find the place where they're connected already, right? Like our students are online, they're developing these online presence and they have things that they do, and bringing that into the classroom, like, what do you do? What do you like? How do you share that? How do you create your voice outside of school? It really brings the student and their personality into the classroom. And when you build that connection, right? Like in high school, like Katie mentioned, I taught in inner city schools. And if your parents are in jail or, you are struggling for food, photosynthesis is not that important to you. I was a science teacher, but when I can connect you and your experience to the learning, and we find the thing that is in common with the learning and what you're doing, then you're engaged and you're there. And for me, it's that engagement piece. It's the really being able to know all of your students as individuals, regardless of how they want to communicate with you, and then building that community and that just space where they can fail and iterate and try again. And I think the asynchronous component and the technology has really been a strong encourager of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's huge.
I think another big benefit to with the technology, now that we're back in the classroom, the social distancing is hard. We've got desks in rows, and I haven't had desks in rows in my classroom for a long time. I usually have lots of variety of flexible seating and collaborative spaces. And so finding ways to use the technology to make them feel connected while they're actually at school, but separated, has been huge as well. It's really hard to do a collaboration project when you have to sit 4, 5, 6 feet apart from your neighbors and you're not allowed to gather. So I think the technology tools have been amazing at helping kind of bridge that gap and being able to have kids feel like they're together. They can actually do a project together with their devices and be able to interact that way. So I'm constantly just finding new ways to use the technology tools to help while we're here, not just during remote learning as well.
I'd love to dig into that even a little bit more around how are you deciding what tool to use when? How are you deciding, when should I do something synchronously? When should I, make my lesson delivery asynchronous? How are you deciding what that should look like with your lesson planning? And how are you deciding what tools to use? I think we all know there's thousands and thousands of apps and tools and different options that educators have available to them. So how are you deciding what to use and when to use it?
I think that starting with the end goal is the most important thing. Like one of my strongest beliefs around technology is that we should never use technology for technology's sake. Just because the tool is cool or amazing doesn't mean that it's not a standalone activity. We should be deciding what our outcome is and then choosing the appropriate tool to go with it. So, for example, if I want my students to be able to hear each other's poems, then I might do something like Flipgrid and have them be able to share and respond back and forth and hear each other's things. But if I'm in the classroom, like for example, I was getting ready during remote learning to teach a unit on money and counting coins. And that's a really impossible thing for me to see what kids are doing when I don't have, I can't see what's in front of them. So I used Smart Learning Suite Online and was able to just pop in the digital coin manipulatives and then have an activity where the kids all were counting their coins in an individual handout. I could go in and see their work live in real time as they're counting and moving. And then I could actually share my screen and have kids show their counting live in front of the whole class and demonstrate. So I called on kids to demonstrate their counting, and then other kids, they all got a turn and we could all see what was happening. So it made us feel like we were connected even though we weren't. And so just taking the tool that's going to engage, enhance, create the ability to be together or collaborate when before we couldn't. So I think just really focusing on the outcome first is the most important thing when choosing a tool.
Sure.
Yeah, that's huge. How about you, Erin? What would you add to that?
Very much the same. I always start with my objective, what are my learning goals, and then kind of work backwards and then decide how would it benefit. And like Brenna said, am I just using it because it's a cool resource, or is it because it's really going to make sure that I have engagement from as many students as possible? And so yeah, I mean, the Smart Learning Suite has been really great for that, synchronously and asynchronously. We use it even when we're in class. We'll have kids just log on and do activities, and they can collaborate from their seats, and even when they're together, and they can see the big screen, they can see their individual screens, or they can just do individual handouts. And then, like Brenna said, I can go in and see each person individually and give them little feedback and little tips and things. So yeah, it always just starts with the objective, and thinking about that SAMR model too, like what am I using just as a substitution, or what am I actually using to like modify and make it better?
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I have a couple of more questions, but just wanted to shout out as well for anyone in the audience. If you do have questions for our panel members, or thoughts, insights, pieces that you'd like to know more about, please do feel free to use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And just in a couple of minutes, we'll be getting to many of those questions. So please feel free to put them in there. We touched a little bit in a few different responses around the idea of developing skills and developing our, global competencies in our students, and the ways that, synchronous and asynchronous instruction can do that. Chris, I'd throw that over to you to talk a little bit more about the balance of that skill development with synchronous and asynchronous learning. And again, what do we need to use when, and how can these strategies really help with that global competency development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked a little bit earlier on about how, balancing the synchronous and the asynchronous, really teaching students how to manage their time, manage their resources, access their resources, and then start to build them into, communicators. Because the beauty of spanning both of these techniques, right? We're together and then we're working asynchronously. We create this constant dialogue. And so that really helps develop our students' communication skills. And it starts to help them identify the best way to communicate. And it also, because we put them into this asynchronous space where we let them do things on their own, and they start to develop those negotiation skills, those conflict resolution skills, right? When we're not there with them all the time, they sometimes have to sort that on their own, which is really powerful, because then they're learning through that experience, and we're kind of prepping them for the place that we're going. And they get to hear a lot of these varying viewpoints. So what I love about, we have the face-to-face conversations in the classroom, but sometimes we don't hear the voice of all of our students. And that may be because they're English language learners, it may be because of their personality, it may just be because of how fast they process. And so we start to give them these opportunities to not only see and hear the viewpoints of their fellow students, but to give them the time and space to reflect on those and think about how that impacts, stretches, or changes their own thinking. And as we really start to think about, developing global citizens and students who understand the world around them and their individual impact on them, the more time we can give them to analyze and think critically, see these different viewpoints, and match them and map them to their own, I think is really powerful. And those for me are are just some of the great global competencies that they take away. And when we send them off into the world, they're going to take them the places they want to go.
Yep, totally. We've talked a lot about, in our individual classrooms and Erin and Brenna in your individual spaces. What have you seen this look like when it comes to the idea of collaboration between classrooms or between schools, outside of your core group of, students in your class? Have you seen, strategies develop in the last year that have connected across classrooms, across districts, across continents? What has that looked like, or what might you like that to look like going forward? Erin, I'll let you start.
Well, there's the professional learning network has just opened up tremendously, and just being able to see what other people across the globes are doing in their classroom, across the globe, there's only one. Just seeing all the cool things that they're doing in their classroom always makes me want to come back and try it. And so I think that opening myself up to other professional learning networks has really helped as well. And just seeing the resources and sharing out and has been really awesome.
I think
Yeah,
things
that's
like
great.
using also using virtual field trips has been amazing during this experience, because we usually take a couple of field trips during the school year, and I've always done maybe one virtual field trip, but we've just had access to so many, and so many new ones have opened up. I did a lot of the Skype in the Classroom ones this year, which has now actually become part of Flipgrid Live.
Yeah.
But my kids have had such amazing experiences. We've learned from authors. We've gone to Sea Life centers. We've gone to turtle rehab. And we've gotten to actually see and hear from real experts. And so that's been an experience before that, although it was available before, we just didn't really have the time to dig deep into that. And now I feel like it's just a part of what we're going to be doing going forward.
Mhm.
And then also just global collaboration. Having a professional learning network is so important. And with a few other SMART ambassadors in the past, just doing a little getting to know you and learning about other cultures and Flipgrid and global collaboration projects are such a fun and easy way. There's so many ways to connect now. Skype, mystery Skype, or just using Flipgrid to share favorite things with kids from around the world is such a fun way to connect. So the kids are confident and competent in using these tools now. And so it's easy just to plug it in to your learning.
And even authors of books are way more open to sharing out in these ways. And so kids have more accessibility to really discovering reading in a new way, because they can connect with these people who create these books that they love. And then it really makes it fantastic for them.
And what a great way to help tell stories about people who, might not look like the person who's standing in front of their classroom, giving more opportunities for students to see and hear from people that look like them.
Yes.
To, just smell, if you're collaborating with another group of students in another part of the world, having the opportunity to dispel myths about, about what different cultures might be like, and really building that global mindset that is vital to the workforce. Chris, what kind of opportunities or pieces have you seen?
So I'm going to highlight one that actually was my daughter's favorite. They were studying ecosystems, and her teacher was able to get them live stream video of all of the animals that they were learning about. So her class watched eagles hatch together. And for me, like that connection and bringing in these videos, which I feel like we didn't do as often in the classroom pre-pandemic because we didn't want to sit the kids in front of videos, right? And we've kind of shifted our thinking on that. We've shifted it now to, okay, how can we connect them to the real world? And then once they're connected, she then figured out how to find all these other videos of animals. So again, like her passion, and then bringing that back into the classroom. And when I kind of scale that up to like, what can we do for our high schoolers? Like they're facing big choices. They're deciding what they're doing with the rest of their lives, and having access and having some personalized access, right? Like we're doing these asynchronous things. We're not doing the same thing at the same time. How do we get them connected with the individuals that can help them grow? How do we start to teach them that soft skill of networking and finding the people who share your passions and interests, understanding the pathways they pursued to get where they're going? And again, to Katie's point, finding people who look like you doing the things that you want to do. Like that right there is huge. And I hope that we keep doing that and do it more and more as we move forward.
Yeah, more important than ever. Hi, Dwayne.
Hey,
I think we have a few questions for the whole panel coming in. Thank you, everyone who's added questions. Please feel free to keep those coming in. But Dwayne, I'd love to turn the mic over to you for questions from the floor.
all right. So we'll ask all attendees to please continue putting your questions in the Q&A. Any questions you may have for the panelists. First question came in from Don. Is there any psychology or pedagogy that guides your planning or lesson flow? And what do you use to keep your planning focused? So open up to anyone that wants to answer.
I think I really try to focus on the 4 C's of communication, collaboration. I think those are huge. And I think they're so important to kids. It's easy to just follow the curriculum. We have a lot of must-dos. We have to cover this. We have the Common Core. Those are all things that all teachers are used to having to design their lesson around the standards, right? But I think we really need to focus on what kind of person do we want this child to be when they grow up? And so focusing on those things, like how are we going to get them to be a communicator, and how are we going to get them to collaborate with others? The more and more automated everything gets, as technology continues to evolve, it's going to be more important than ever to have students that are able to collaborate and communicate effectively, because that's going to be the most important skill when they graduate.
Erin?
And I think during this time too, we realized the need for social emotional learning and how critical it was. And I don't think the younger students were able to really communicate how challenging or how difficult being at home all the time, and then not being able to see their friends or only connecting with their teacher through a screen, and how that weared them out, you know. So it was so important to kind of remember those things and help them just navigate it and feel better about what was happening about and what they could control too. That was the other part of it. But also the critical thinking and the problem solving skills was really important too for me. Like, you know, what are you going to do about that? You have a problem, you know, even something so little like, okay, your computer won't turn on. What are you going to do about that? Or you can't get onto a website. What do you know that you can do? What are your action steps to kind of solve your problem? And so those are the things that always come into play for me. Like, so yeah, social emotional has been really big this year though.
Open up the floor to my friends at SMART. You have any insights?
Well, I would say for me, it's also about really, you know, putting the students at the center of it. Like Brenna said, there's a lot that we have to teach. There's a lot that we have to do, but the more we can get our students' individual voice, creativity, critical thinking in there, and kind of, you know, take a step back and become more of the guides as teachers and give these active personalized learning experiences, regardless of, you know, whether we're doing it remotely or face-to-face, like that for me is always a big focus. It's just getting that student voice out there and letting them connect to what they're doing.
And I think one of the pieces that both Brenna and Erin mentioned at the beginning as well is, you know, start with the end in mind. You know, keeping your goals, you know, for your students, whether that's, you know, what do I want them to accomplish today? What do I need them to accomplish this year? Encouraging that as a focal point for your planning. Make sure you're kind of working backwards in a way to help yourself get and help your students get where you want them to be.
Yeah. I'll say when the pandemic hit, me and my wife, we're both former educators. Well, she's still a teacher, but we immediately became the teachers in the house. So my question is, how has the your asynchronous tools help parents connect deeper with their child's work and accessibility to the teacher?
That's a good question. I think that for us and where we are, Microsoft Teams has been an amazing tool because it allows us to constantly be in communication with our kids. And I think also, we were able to give parents access to part of our OneNote, so we can have digital tools, resources, things that they might need to access for their kids. We're able to just have it always live there so that they can access it whenever they want, not just email me and have to wait for me to email it back to them. So it's kind of shifted how we do things and communicate with parents. I even really loved having virtual conferences with parents. I thought that was really powerful, just to be able to see them in their environment, and the kids can come in and out at home and things, but I really enjoyed having the family meetings and the connections that were made there versus just having them come to school, and that's stressful, and take off work and all those things. It really allowed people to be comfortable, and I feel like the dialogue was better during those conferences.
For sure.
And I'll just top up, and I think that's such a powerful point, right? That parents don't have to take off time to come to school, right? Like when we can make parent conferences accessible, it just opens up that dialogue, and it's not a thing anymore. It's just a stream of communication that happens. And I think that it really benefits our students and connects our parents to the school community.
Yeah, most definitely. One final question I have, and I think one that's very important. Can you share activities that you are doing, and this is from Patricia, that you're doing for self-care and how they have benefited you? So how are you taking care of yourself during this time of the pandemic?
Erin?
The answer is you better be.
Well, I think for a little while, anytime I heard the word self-care, I was like, because everything was just so challenging, and I just felt, stressed and worried, and I never really knew what the next day was going to bring, or will we ever get back to the classroom? Would I ever teach in this normal way again? And so, yeah, self-care was one of those trigger words for me for a little while. But now, like, really, when I'm getting better at when it's, time to shut everything down, to not go back to it, to not look at the emails, even though I, pride myself as always having that open door communication. And anytime something has happened, shoot me an email or let me know. But really just being able to say that can wait until tomorrow, when I have rested and I have seen my family and I've petted my dog and I've watched that bad reality TV or whatever, and then I can, come back to it the next day with a fresh mind. And then that way I'm not in work all the time, like in work mode, in school mode. However, though, like planning for activities and figuring out fun things to bring into the classroom, or new things to try, is kind of my self-care too. So I'm always trying to find that balance of like, how can I do well at my job, but still take care of myself and feel good about both of my lives, really, like my school life and my home life.
Yeah, it's hard to distinguish the two. Like,
Yeah.
Very much.
teach in the same place that I now,
Right.
Setting boundaries when we're digitally connected is hard.
Oh,
And
for
that's like
sure.
the
Yeah.
most important thing for me. I have time that I shut it all off. And if you don't do that, you're always connected, and that's not really healthy either. I think making sure to get outside every single day, no matter what, is really huge, especially when you're on a screen a lot. And for me, it's been yoga and going outside.
My smart friends, I know it's changed our lives too. Any comments, concerns? How are you making and coping?
Yeah, I think the boundaries piece is huge. And some people I know are really great at it, and some people aren't. I think we all have to take that level of responsibility for knowing where our lines are, because my lines might be different, than than Chris's lines, than Dwayne's lines, you know, for what we have and what we need, and to not be afraid to say, this is what I need today, and to give grace to ourselves and to our colleagues with what we need to take it, and with our colleagues respecting and being graceful with what they need to be at their best.
I think that's such a great point, Katie, because the pandemic puts so much pressure on all of us, right? Like to perform better, to perform more, to deliver the impossible. And with this huge cloud of insecurity hanging over us too. And so just knowing, you know, to take that time and set that boundary and find that space, you know, for me just to get out of my head, to like focus on something completely different from, you know, what I do during work, and that drive to, you know, really deliver the best things that I can. Yeah. Pausing, stepping back. And I'm with Brenna. There's been plenty of yoga involved in my day to day.
Especially at the
piece.
beginning. When we first, especially at the beginning, when we first went into lockdown and all of this, when you know, teachers who were tech savvy carried a lot of weight because we were helping everybody else that, you know, teachers who didn't have those skills, it was really a hard time because I felt like I was doing two jobs for a while, but everybody's learned so much from it. So.
Makes sense. I wholeheartedly agree. Trying to make sure you keep sanity and making sure that you also have self-care time. All right. I would like to thank you once again to Brenna and Aaron from Lake Washington School District. Thank you so much. And also a league district. Thank you for being with us today and sharing your insight. And also to our corporate partners, one of my good friends who I've been friends with SMART, with Katie and Chris now. It's been a while. Thank you so much for being a great corporate partner and also continue to do right by students. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to, if you have any questions or concerns or would like to see the slide deck, we have the bit.ly here. But if you have any comments and concerns or want to learn more about SMART, please feel free to reach out to Katie Novak or look at the SMART website to find out more about SMART Technologies. Also, if you would like to learn more about the league or have any questions or comments for the league, feel free to reach out to the league. We're always here to help and support students and teachers. All right, we also have some upcoming opportunities. And now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Katie.
Awesome. Thanks, Dwayne. A couple of really great opportunities coming up we wanted to share with the audience. One of them is our EdShift webinar series that the illustrious Chris runs and has some really wonderful conversations based on research and based on strategies for the classroom. Tomorrow, she's talking about active learning in all environments. And then on June 3rd, for the last EdShift of this season, she'll be talking about the power of student reflection. So really invaluable, important conversation there. And then she'll be taking a little break and we'll be getting rolling with that webinar series again in August. So very excited for that. We also just announced, this is one of the first groups to hear about it, professional development event this summer that ties really nicely to our last question, because we're really focused on teacher wellness, on the idea of refreshing, resetting, and re-energizing for what's coming next. So July 13th and 14th, and we'll be able to share some of those details on social media and with you as well. So please take a look for those opportunities, and we're glad to be able to share them with you.
Thank you, Katie. All right, now we have a few Digital Promise opportunities, and I'm now going to invite my colleague, Marcy Zhang, to come and tell us a little bit about Project Topeka.
Great, thank you, Dwayne. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcy Zhang from Digital Promise. I'm the Network and Programs Project Director for the League, and I'm excited to be sharing this opportunity with you. Project Topeka is a new project that we're working on for this fall. We're hoping to connect to school districts who are looking for resources to help improve students' argumentative writing skills. So we're currently recruiting school districts to pilot a new Ready feedback tool called Project Topeka. And I know the panelists before talked about the importance of feedback for students throughout the learning process. So this is a really great example of that. Resources include an automated essay scoring tool, lesson plans, and other curricular resources for teachers, and a facilitated online community of practice for teachers to connect to other teachers. And we're looking to work with about 20 English and language arts teachers within a school district in grade 7, 8th, and or 9th. If there are fewer teachers, that's okay. We would still like to talk to you. And this pilot is going to be implemented this coming year in 21-22. And this project is based on our inclusive innovation framework. So we're looking for school districts that have majority, or at least 40% Black students, Latinx students, and or students experiencing poverty. So if you're interested, please let me know by filling out a very short entrance form. The bit.ly URL is there. It's bit.ly/DP Topeka. And if you're interested and want to email me directly, that's fine too. I'll put my email address in the chat for you guys. But please let me know if you have any questions, and look forward to hearing from you guys about this project. Thank you so much, Dwayne.
Thank you so much, Marcy. And, would like to reiterate, if you are not a league district, that is fine. Please feel free to sign up. You get a little bit of taste of what the league and Digital Promise is all about. We are not about just talking the talk. We also walk the walk. So we do look at research and back everything that we do with research. Thank you once again, Marcy, for this great opportunity. Up next, the League of Innovative Schools. So if you are intrigued by what you saw today, I want to learn more about the League, or have any of your district superintendents who are innovative and looking to share some of the knowledge that they have developed in their district, please feel free to share this with your League, with your district leaders. The League is in full swing of recruitment. Our recruitment ends on Friday. So please, please, please share this with your district leaders and have them sign up to be a part of I think is the best network in the United States, and probably the world, to join and be some thought partners about innovative practices and how we can best support the needs and change the trajectory of all students. So please, please sign up and be a part of the League. All right. We have a wealth of webinars that we have developed, but if you would like to watch this webinar, the recording will be up soon. So please visit our YouTube channel, and actually you can share it out with your friends or watch it over again. Thank you once again to our SMART partners and to our Lake Washington League teachers, and to Marcy. We thank you for joining us. We hope that you learned something today. And we also want to remind you to continue to do right by students. Thank you, and see you next time.